Meditation is the practice of concentration. The use of the power of concentration to break through the illusions of the triple veil of Maya in which we are embedded. The first difficulty that we have to face in this project is overcoming the presumption that reality is composed of objects. And that we are objects. The materialist believes that the world is only made of physical objects. And the energy and the space and the time and which connects them and which acts as a matrix for them. This is materialism. And this is the consciousness operating at the level of the realm of experience. But the psychoanalysts have shown that we also are in a realm of subjective objects, objects in the mind, and that we identify as a subjective object in the mind. And the qualities of that subjective object determine how the physical object of the body that is identified with will behave and feel in the world of experience. The realm of imperience, or the subjective objects, is not necessarily in sync with the world of experience. And this is why it is possible for people to have delusional relationships with their own body. An anorexic, for example, can think he or she is very fat when objectively others would say, no, 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 you're too thin. But the body image carried in the subjective objective plane tells them something different than the mirror tells them, and they believe the evidence of the mind, not of the physical eyes. And so the breakthrough has to be of both the objective objects and the subjective objects. That breakthrough can be achieved through reason, through a purification of the capacity to think one's way out of it. But then one is stuck on the plane of thought, which itself is the realm of Maya, from which we must awaken. Because thought also is an object. Words are objects. Mathematics is patterns of objects, even more subtle than the subjective objects, pure mind objects. And the addiction to manipulating the mind objects must also be overcome. When that happens, the light gets through. When the power of concentration disidentifies from both the physical world, the sense of the ego consciousness battling with its inner demons, and the mind that's trying to figure the whole thing out, then there is freedom to concentrate upon the source of all of this. And to realize that your real self was never embedded in any of these planes. but that the world is in fact made up of information, and that information, just as the ones and zeros in a computer program, will be translated into images and sounds on a computer screen or a hologram that will look like a world but will actually be a virtual reality. And the mind that understands that world or relates to it as if it is within it is a virtual reality within that virtual reality. And then the level of mind that understands all that and can reprogram it is yet a third level of virtual reality. Beyond all of those lies the real reality. But only through the power of concentration and disidentification from all objects, including the object that is the Logos, will the illusion of being an individual and the process of separation, individuation that produced the ego consciousness can now transcend the ego consciousness. And in that liberation, discover the real source of our being. Which then has the power to produce miraculous effects within these virtual realities. Because one is no longer an artifact of those realities. The level of the subjective object is an artifact of the collective consciousness of the culture. Its signifiers get introjected and become the subjective object that you think you are within a context created for you by those signifiers that give you your values and your ambitions and your fears. And so what you think of as your own subjectivity is actually a collective subjective activity of which you are a part, embedded in, indoctrinated in, and even though maybe rebelling against, have nonetheless accepted the presumptions of that virtual reality game, which you cannot win. In the same way, there is another consciousness behind the objective objects of the plane of so-called external world materialism. And those objects are also subjective, as the animists have long known. But they are a function of a cosmic consciousness, a subjectivity that operates on yet another plane of awareness, that is that of nature. Both of these planes, of nature and of spirit, as related to the individual ego mind, the unconscious, the soul, all come from the same source. And so the unification of all of these realms of virtual reality will occur once the breakthrough into that real that is beyond time, beyond space, beyond images, beyond objects, beyond the sense of individuality and separation, and beyond mind itself that can understand all this. There lies our home, our source. But it requires great power of will to concentrate sufficiently to overcome the magnetic pull of our addiction to images, to objects, to thoughts, to the pleasures of possessing those objects and being possessed and held by other objects, and the more subtle pleasures of thinking you're manipulating and strategizing and mastering those objects, and all of the jouissances that come at every level of physical, subtle, and pure mind object in which we have experienced an identification and a pleasure. And it is only once that pleasure has turned to pain and the interest has been lost and the dead-endness of it all has been recognized that the power of concentration will return to wonder about, but who am I, who is in the midst of all of this, to whom all of this appears. And through that, working one's way through the outer and then the inner labyrinth, one comes to the core of being, which has never left its eternal place in the stillness of absolute presence, from which all of these levels of Maya are emitted as a rainbow. As a film, as a hologram, as an art object. And so the final level of objectification that the mind realizes is not an intellectual recognition, but an aesthetic one. That beauty and the desire for beauty that could only know itself as beauty once it had produced ugliness and evil, would then allow itself to return to its source, to create a yet higher form of beauty, through coming to that source of beauty, goodness, truth, and love. It is this return to the source of our being and the turning of virtual reality into the virtuous real that can bring about a new cycle of time in which the virtues of God are manifest as every subjective and objective object of the universe. The time has come for the renewal of that beauty. And we are manifestations of the power of God as an artist, as the ultimate artist, to reproduce the mandala of the world in its most exquisitely, infinitely beautiful form. But we can only do that once we have retracted our embeddedness in all form and realized the self as the formless, luminous presence. It is that liberation which brings bliss. And we are that. The being sought with the intelligence to return to bliss. Sat Chit Ananda. And the return of what is apparently one to bliss is the return of all, because we are all one.